Carl Reeder, welcome to the Live on Form podcast.
Hey, Jason, thank you so much for having me.
Carl, it's been a while since I was on your podcast, but I've been following you for some time on various social media mediums. I've always liked what you talk about. I've always liked your stance and kind of position on business and your common sense. Yeah, I guess unorthodox in the world of business approach to many things. But just to give our community a bit of insight into your background, I guess, Carl, you are a multiple author of 3 books now, I believe. Entrepreneur, speaker, writer, your advisor. Your new book, Boss It, which is Control Your Time, Your Income, and Your Life, is doing really well. It's a bestseller. And I guess I'd like to understand, and our community understand a bit about how you first got started, your initial journey into the world of business, Carl.
Yeah, sure. So, Jason, first of all, thank you so much. I'm glad that there's a like-minded spirit who actually enjoys the stuff that I put out there. You know what it's like on social media. You post things and you just hope for the best and you hope it lands somewhere, and it couldn't land anywhere better than you. So thank you so much. A little bit about my background. I mean, you've summed up, I guess, what I'm doing quite well. But unlike many people in business, I really fell into it. So if I was to go back, and I'm not going to go back as far as the midwife holding my feet up, but I will go back as far as being at school and that pivotal point at around 15, where you've got to start speaking to careers advisors and working out what you're going to do with your life. And at that point, no, I was 15. I had everything in front of me if I wanted it. I was fortunate enough to win the grammar school lottery, I guess. Through my postcode, I was able to go to a grammar school, so I had a good education. But the reality was that academia didn't do it for me. And I couldn't see anything worse at the age of 15 than going on to do my GCSEs, to do my A-levels, to go on to a degree and follow that normal path, so to speak. So unlike most people who are floating around in the business world, I didn't go down that path of deciding I'm going to do business studies or deciding I'm going to be an investment banker or whatever. Instead, I decided at the age of 15 and 3/4 to become a hairdresser and started up the YTS hairdresser.
Oh, I can understand why, Carl. I mean, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
You can see the skills right here, can't
perfectly,
you?
mate. Perfectly, very close.
This is it. But look, I started YTS hairdresser. 6 weeks later, I realised I wasn't cut out for it, if you pardon the pun. But then I realised I had to get a real job. So I went back to school, did my GCSEs and fell into the world of accountancy. I had no idea what an accountant did. I had no idea what the end product of accountancy was. I had no idea who they sold to, what they did. I remember quite vividly going to the library. And that dates me having to go to a library to read a physical book. But I read the careers book about what an accountant was and what chartered accountancy was. What a set of accounts and a profit and loss account was, and I just regurgitated it in my interviews and managed to get the job. I realized very early on, Jason, that whilst I was able to get the job of being an accountant, I didn't particularly enjoy being an accountant, and that was because I didn't enjoy being stuck in a room adding up numbers. But what I loved about it was the opportunity to go out and speak to business owners. So I'd go out and I would just use the naivety of youth and ask them the simple questions like, why do you do this? Why do you do that? A perfect example was an offie. So I went out to an off license and they were buying, I can't remember the exact numbers. So, clearly they probably won't listen to this podcast, so they can't correct me. They're buying bottles of Coke for £1, let's say, and selling it for £1.50. And my question was along the lines of, why don't you go to Sainsbury's and buy it for 50p? And their answer was really obvious when they said it, but it was the benefit I had of being at a young age as a business advisor. They said to me, well, you just can't buy the volume. You're going to get questions if you walk out of Sainsbury's with 2 trolleys full of bottles of Coke. But that was the lack of experience and the ability to use that naivety of youth to ask the questions that other people don't ask about the realities of running a business. And over time, I guess I just turned up and kept being stupid by asking these questions of business owners and asking them, why do they put their stock there? Why do they design their logo like this? Why do you do this or that or the other? Why do you use this bit of software? Why do you work in this way? And over time, what I realized was the narrative of the conversation was changing. And it evolved from me asking the questions to actually me having a bit of an internal database, which was the cumulative knowledge of thousands of business owners who had humored me and shared that information with me. And I was then able, I guess this was in my mid 20s, to actually feed back some of that information on an anonymized basis. So they were my business school. So that was, I guess, how I migrated into a business advisor role. Alongside that, I became a business owner myself. So I touched on earlier that I wasn't particularly inclined to do accountancy. I didn't particularly enjoy it, but something stood out in me. And if I was to be honest, I'm trying not to brag here, but I could sell, I could win clients, I could promote myself, I could promote the business, I could do the stuff that most accountants tend to struggle with. And when I joined my firm D&T as an employee back in 2002, I was gifted a bunch of clients, I mean, martial artists. And the reality was that nobody else in the firm really enjoyed working with them. They were spread all over the country. They struggled to build rapport with them. I treated them as mates and went out and met them and just got to know them and their business. And before long, again, asking the stupid questions, I began to know when I was driving into an area, I was able to have a gut feel of what the demographics of the area was like. Looking at the map, I could tell what their territory was, and knowing that people wouldn't cross the road from the other side of the dual carriageway. I had a good idea about their catchment areas. I had a good idea of how many students, how many 8-year-old kids can you cram into a hall. I got to a point of being able to have that gut feel. And before long, I became the trusted advisor to about 250 martial arts schools across the UK. So by doing that stuff, that led me towards business ownership because, again, by my mid 20s, I got to the point where I didn't have the qualifications on paper and I didn't have the miles on the clock. But quite frankly, I had the biggest client portfolio within the practice and I was offered the opportunity to buy in. So bought into the business and spent some time taking it from a very small practice to a multi-mil turnover award-winning business. Then in 2012, that was when we'd completed the buyout. That was when I started the process of stepping away, which is an ongoing process. I stepped away officially in 2019, but I'm still involved as a non-exec chair, but probably a bit more involvement than a non-exec chair should have.
Yep. Okay.
And yeah, that I guess is my core story, Jason.
So do you, you mentioned the school thing and leaving at 15. Do you, because that's probably a topic that's debated quite a lot these days. The benefit of a further and higher education, and you clearly benefited from not doing that. You learned on the job. You didn't go down probably a more theoretical approach, which might have led you into a different career and a different mindset. Did you build the mindset and the approach and the ability to sell? You mentioned the ability to sell. Was that something that was almost inherited in you? Did you learn that at school? Did you learn it through your youth? Would you have been the same person at 18 had you gone through education, in your opinion, as you were without doing so?
Amazing questions, and I'm going to have to break that down into a couple of areas. It's a really good question, Jason. I think that I need to look back at my schooling. So as I mentioned, I was one of those who won the postcode lottery of grammar school. And I say postcode lottery of being afforded what would be seen as almost equivalent to a private school education, but without having to pay for it.
Yep.
But the reality was, there's a flip side. To every coin, you've got heads and tails. The flip side of that was that whilst I was given this great education, I had to leave my mates behind. And I had also had an upbringing that wasn't in line with most of the people at grammar school. Look, one of the unspoken secrets about grammar schools is that, yes, it provides social mobility to those who perhaps couldn't afford to get onto the private school way, like my family. I was a normal kid, grew up in the council estate. I had what I thought was a fairly normal life.
Mm-hmm.
A good proportion of my schoolmates, though, They were privately educated up to the age of 11 to get them through the 11 plus, so that parents didn't have to pay for private school. Okay, that was the reality of it. So I was in a school. First of all, it's an all-boys school, so that has a good proportion of the, I guess, the sales skills that I had to learn for outside of school. I had no knowledge or experience of how to speak to girls from about the age of 12 to about 13 and a half, where I, from starting senior school to going out and realizing I wanted to go out and meet girls. So I had to learn sales skills there. I also had to learn how to work with, relate to people who had a very different upbringing to me as well. We're talking in my class, I would be able to count on one hand the amount of kids who had a similar upbringing to me.
Yep.
Probably on both hands the amount who had quite literally the silver spoon and would have almost certainly paid their way into Oxford or Cambridge or wherever they wanted to go, and then a bunch in the middle. So I had to learn that stuff. So did my sales skills, were they in me, or was it something that developed? I think that I think it's a mix of the two, but I think it certainly developed at an earlier age than it would have done because of the environment that I was in. To go back to the other part of your question, would I have been a different person at the age of 18 had I stuck with academia? Quite frankly, Jason, it wouldn't have been an option. I was a teenage father as well. So at the age of 17, I believe it was, my girlfriend at the time fell pregnant.
Wow.
I did what all teenage relationships did. We got a lift up to Gretna Green to get married, thinking I was doing the right thing.
Well, Carl, you obviously worked out how to talk to girls anyway between the 12 and 13-year-olds. So it obviously worked.
Listen, I had a path in life that wasn't necessarily a grammar school path. So being in a grammar school at the age of 18 wouldn't have been a possibility. However, had it been a possibility, Jason, I'd have been a different person at 16, because I'd have had to have been a different person at 16 to take that path to get to 18.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that for me, the formative years were my early to mid-teens. And I think it was as much a result of academia. Academia helped, don't get me wrong, because when I went in for one of the interviews, I had two interviews at accounting firms, one at the Army. Believe it or not, I was underweight for the Army, even though it was an office job, I was underweight. Okay. But with two accounting firms, one of them, the partner went to the same school I did, and it was a talking point. So again, did the actual study help me, or did the prestigious saying when I went to XYZ school? So there's a myriad of issues within that, but yeah, I guess that was always my path, was to leave school early.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a lot of interest for me, and moving on to social media, I always try and position my advice, because that's what it is, or mentorship, or whatever you want to talk about, around or targeted towards those who probably get into business via unorthodox route. I think I think back to where I grew up, and any mentors or advisors or examples around my town, and it was a typical northern working class town, and the examples were few and far between. You had those who were making money, but probably doing it in a nefarious or onerous way, but were looked upon as, kind of working class heroes or local heroes. And then you had the guys who lived in the posh houses who were probably in banking, and, which of the two were the more corrupt? I'm not quite sure. I guess that's probably down to interpretation or perception, but I always think my advice and the things I talk about on LinkedIn especially are here to kind of help that kind of, that kid like me who I've got the kinship with, and then understand that they didn't really go through A levels. They didn't really get any business advice. They didn't get left any contacts or money to get started. They didn't really get left much guidance to go down a business route. And I always think that's why I relate to your stuff, because I think it's very apt, and I think it's very, targeted towards those people that don't get that great start in through education, don't have the little black book passed on by their parents, don't have the money for private education. And I think there's a lot to be said in that, but I don't think there's many pathways through.
Yeah, I would agree entirely. Look, I think the problem we've got, social media has, and I'm sure we could talk about this for hours, but social media has given an amplification to voices that perhaps shouldn't be amplified. And everybody comes into it on an equal footing, and then can build up based on, I guess, the metrics that we wouldn't normally use as a society to rate people. You talked about the people in posh houses who've worked in banks and maybe got family money, or the people in posh houses who've been selling coke outside schools. You got those two paths, but the size of a house, the size of a bank balance was a traditional metric that people could gauge as one lever of success. It certainly isn't the whole of success, but it was a way of measuring. The problem with social media, as you say, is there's a lot of noise out there. And I think one of the real concerning bits, and I don't know if I'm answering your question, so please bring me back on track.
That's fine. It was a very long kind of spew of words rather than a question, Carl. I tend to do that a lot.
No worries. But if I go off on a different tangent, please feel free to rein me in.
No worries.
But one of the challenges is that business advice has become fashionable and glamorous over the last 10 years. You got the Instagram generation, where it's all about being outside a private jet, taking your selfie and the Lamborghini, and all of that nonsense that goes with entrepreneur Instagram, which is at a younger demographic. Don't even get me started on TikTok and the nonsense on there. But generally, you've got tribes of people trying to advise other businesses. They haven't actually set up a business themselves. They've almost gone in with the purpose of advising businesses and selling this nonsense and noise as a way of, I don't know whether it's building their own brand, trying to build a business off the back of it. I don't know. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. And one of the things that I try to do is, and I'm really glad you called it out, and I thank you so much, is to try and relate to that person who's just an ordinary person who's fallen into business, or has got the dream of falling into business but doesn't know how to start. Because 1 in 7 of us are self-employed, and we know that as a statistic, but we don't emotionally get it. But if we walk out of our house, if you live on a road full of terrace houses, for example, you look left, you look right, you look straight ahead, one of those people is going to be a business owner.
Yeah.
But they are people just like us. They live on the same street. They've got the same kind of earnings. They drive a similar car. They're very similar to who we are and what we do. But the narrative around business in the media, in academia, through business studies and so on, is that it's about big shiny glass buildings and stock price valuations and FTSE 100 and all of this noise around business. But the reality is, Jason, you know this. I mean, you built a bigger business than I did, but you know that ultimately business is about buying something for a £5 and selling it for a tenner, and doing it over and over and over and over and over. And you know what? It ain't sexy. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of effort. But that consistency and that focus on, I hate using management jargon, but unit level economics and just making sure that you're making money, that is what builds a business. And trying to overcome some of that noise and nonsense on social media, I guess there's 2 ways of doing it. You could either join them, and I just couldn't do that because I wouldn't want my kids seeing that advice. I wouldn't want my kids taking that advice. I wouldn't want them implementing it because it's nonsense. Or just saying it from the heart and what I genuinely believe is right, and hopefully helping someone along the way.
You mentioned personal brands, and that's quite interesting. I was going to ask you how you navigate your personal brand with your understanding and your beliefs around social media, and the fact you've got businesses and you've run businesses and you've seen a lot of businesses. So you've got a vast amount of experience, at ground level, looking into businesses and at advisor level, but also, personal level. How do you manage that personal brand aspect? Because there are a lot of people out there building a very, very big personal brand, advising people on what they should do, and they've never really done it. It's that all, Nassim Taleb skin in the game thing, right? There's a lot of people out there who are advising without having skin in the game, without ever having skin in the game, but they're talking in absolute terms about things they've never really experienced, and that's hard to navigate because there are a lot of people out there, a lot of business owners, but a lot of aspiring business founders, especially young, that aren't really on that don't have an aspiration to build a personal brand. They don't like the noise. They don't like the anxiety inducing, sort of personal turmoil or conflict it can cause, because it's hard, right? It's hard posting something and either getting nothing back or getting too much back or getting criticized and being, almost pulled apart from the inside. That's what's happening now. I guess, how do you manage that? How do you manage that personal brand thing around your credibility and the fact you've got a family? So, it's a challenge.
It absolutely is, 110%. And I agree with all of the pain points that you've said. So my personal brand has been built by mistake after mistake after mistake, and I'll try and share some of those mistakes to, I guess, help inform, educate, and save somebody else having the same traps. But just to call out one of the things that you said within that, you're absolutely right about there's a newer generation. I think there's two different sides. You've got those who want to build a business without a personal brand because they've seen the downsides to it. There's also others who either want to build a personal brand to then build a business, which feels like possibly the wrong way round to me, or they're actually looking to scale up a business to build a personal brand.
Yep.
I know somebody who wants to set up a national chain of franchises to elevate their personal brand. And quite frankly, the investment of what they'll put in to grow the business, they'll put it into a PR company and they'll do that job for them. So I think there's a lot of fear around building a personal brand, but there's also a lot of misguided attraction towards building a personal brand because of the risk that it brings. So let me share with you, I guess, why I went on that journey, and then some of the bits that I learned along the way.
Yeah, that'd be great.
In relation to challenges.
Yeah.
The reason I started on that journey was for a few reasons, and it was around January 2016. I can tell you exactly when it was. It was January the 13th, 14th-ish. And the reason I can tell you that with such clarity was that, unfortunately, I lost access to two of my kids. And it was as my wife got pregnant, and they weren't, it wasn't all linked too closely together, just to make that absolutely clear. There was a hell of a lot of breathing space between, but that was the catalyst for me losing access to two of my kids. And I made that decision then that I wanted to make an imprint personally on the world. And if somebody was to type my name into Google, they could find me. That was it. So it was a personal driver. I combined that with a business justification, but I believe that people do business with people, regardless of how big the two businesses are. And we had allowed my business D&T. One of the mistakes I'd made when stepping away was to try and totally depersonalize it and remove all personality and become too corporate. We had about 50 odd staff then, and I was trying to do the whole, we're a massive corporate thing. And actually, the personal brand was a way of injecting some personality and life into the brand. And then there's also the ego thing. Look, I love the sound of my own voice. So it ticked my ego box as well. So I kind of stumbled into it without without a planned decision. I had written one of my books before, but I'd written it with about 900 social media followers. That was all I had. And I was fortunate to get the contract, but I didn't really know how to sell it. So the book kind of rode off the back of these efforts as well. And it all just magically aligned that I'd hit a sweet spot. There was no one delivering small business advice without trying to make some money out of it. At the end of the first month, so January 2016, I'd got 5 bits of coverage in the national press without a PR agent, without a publicist. So I just kept going. So that's how the journey started. What I learned along the way is a number of things. So you're right. You get overwhelmed by noise. My mobile might as well be surgically attached to me, and it's no fun. I wish I could leave it behind, but I'd probably have a breakdown. It's like to that level.
Yep.
we all have that dopamine hit when we go onto social media and see how many likes or comments we've got. Well, imagine that on steroids. It's not good. And you might think it gets diluted, but bigger the numbers get, it really doesn't. It just gets amplified. So that's a very real issue. I've had to battle social media storms as well. It really doesn't help being I don't like to use the term working class because I've no idea what class I am, to be honest. I'm just trying to do the best for my family. But being a white male of a certain age on social media, you can type something and be accused of saying something else, which can be challenging. I was accused of all sorts of racism, sexism, and so on when I made a comment about Meghan Markle looking absolutely stunning. This was about 5 years ago. I said she looks absolutely stunning, but unfortunately, she might have to follow royal protocol. And that obviously got extrapolated out into all of these accusations. My Twitter went wild. I wanted to bury myself for the day. It was horrific.
That's the challenge with social media, isn't it? It's not real life either. It's not real world. I mean, you wouldn't face those sort of that kind of ridiculousness outside of that social media virtual town square.
This is it, and you obviously can't put the necessary disclaimers and context in 140 characters. So you got that challenge. I also found that it's a real risk because one of the interesting things I've learned about personal branding from looking at other people, and this is more of an observation than anything else. I know that I'm not going to appeal to everyone. I know that there will be certain people who will look at me and say, yeah, he's just a jumped up accountant or jumped up Essex boy or jumped up this, that, or the other. There will be people who want to snipe. There'll be people who want to take me down. There'll be people who see that I'm doing for free what they're charging for. There'll be others who believe that I'm charging for what they do for free. There'll be a load of reasons why people will want to take me down. And I've come to terms with the fact that not everyone will like me. But it's a very blurry line between knowing that you are going to be Marmite and deliberately being Marmite. And one of the more negative school of thoughts that I've seen around personal branding and what people are trying to do is deliberately going out to be provocative. And I'm not saying this to be provocative, but it really pisses me off. It really frustrates me seeing people going out to alienate one subset of people in the hope that it will attract another. And this artificial veneer that comes with the whole personal branding world is a bit of a nightmare. So, it's really interesting because you say about there's people who don't want to build a personal brand. There are people who do without perhaps any reason to or justification. If you were to ask me the question, Jason, would I do it again? It's a really tough one to answer because I guess my personal brand has given me more than I ever could have expected a personal brand would, but not all in a good way.
Yeah, I guess the ones that frustrate me are the populist ones that kind of take on any situation in the social sphere and then choose their narrative based on the populist or which way the wind's blowing at any particular time.
Yeah,
and that's just disingenuous to me, and is it's kind of performative allyism. I want to say virtue signaling because that's ultimately been used to death and misused a lot. But I think there's far too much of that around personal branding, and I like a few really good commentators on things like LinkedIn, and they don't have big followings, but they really do speak genuinely. And I think it stands out, and I'm not sure if it'll stand the test of time or not, and I'm not sure if it'll make them any bigger or more popular than they are. And that's a frustrating thing because there's a time now where almost telling the truth is the most the riskiest thing you could do is telling the truth.
It is, and we live in a world of it is a minefield. It is a world of minds when you try and navigate this. I did something as simple as taking a selfie on a train, and I got no negativity from this. But I did something as simple as a selfie on a train, And I felt compelled to put at the top of the post a disclaimer: mask removed for selfie purposes.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, yeah.
Because otherwise, the risk was, had I not put that disclaimer in, the risk was the narrative of a post would move away from whatever nonsense it was I'd written towards the nonsense about a debate of whether I should have worn a mask, was I wearing a mask, etc., etc. So that's one of the tricky things with personal branding is you want to avoid, I guess, being in that populist, changing, riding that wave of whatever the acceptable narrative is, which is different on each platform as well. You know, if you try to go onto TikTok, is brutal. If you try and go onto TikTok with a Twitter narrative, you know, if you look at the profile of a Twitter user, and you know, you'd look at it, you say socialist, probably leaning towards either Corbyn or the Green Party, looking to take everyone down politically. You go onto TikTok, my God, it's the opposite. It really is the opposite. And you got very real risk that actually you're just diluting your message. You're not yourself, and you're faking to be one person here, one person there, and it's just a complete nonsense. It really is a minefield. And the problem you've got on the other hand is, whilst you and I and yeah, there are others who want to express who they are and how they think, and I think we all like to think that we're quite normal and we're quite reasonable and centrist in our views, because why on earth would any of us take a view that's offensive? Yeah, you wouldn't do it.
No.
And it comes back to human behavior. I genuinely don't believe that anyone wants to do wrong. It's just that their alignment is probably different. But anyway, that's a totally different subject. But we believe we're normal people putting out a normal message. The challenge is you have to be so mindful of the way it could be received by so many different audiences as well.
Yeah, and I think that's another challenge, is that I think we're all fooled into believing that the world exists, and you know, the world are all taking part in every social media platform, when the reality is the majority of the world in life goes on completely outside of all the platforms, and rules are being made and discussed and agreed on social media platforms without consulting 70% of the people who just don't exist on these social media platforms. So when they're called out for things they're saying, that they have no inkling about what this means, because they're not up to date with the terms. They're not following the subjects. They're simply living their life, focusing on immediate things like paying the bills, feeding their family, working hard, concentrating on school, trying to get a holiday here and there, and all these things are being decided, and these rules are being made on a platform where they're just simply not even existing.
Completely agree. And look, if social media owned the narrative, there's a very important business lesson that I'll come to in this as well. But if social media owned the fair representation of the entire narrative, look, Boris wouldn't have been elected, it had been Jeremy Corbyn. However, against Jeremy Corbyn's wishes, we would have probably stayed in the EU. We would have probably defunded the police and torn up loads of bills and all of this kind of stuff. But that hasn't happened in the real world through democratically elected processes. Likewise, you look at the Americans and the fanaticism around Trump, and the reality is that Biden was elected in, and the overarching view that can come through on social media isn't necessarily the overarching view of society. But I've also seen this in businesses. And sometimes the voices on social media are disproportionately represented within the minds of business owners and team members.
The vocal minority.
The vocal minority, and we all know that the squeaky wheel gets oiled. So it is quite concerning to see how many businesses are adapting and tweaking things based on social media noise rather than objectively looking at the situation.
So move on to your books, Carl. Tell me about your new one, Bossy. Why you wrote it? What was the motivation? Who's it for? Just fill us in there.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm glad you didn't ask me about the first one because I can't remember the content because it's so out of date. But Boss It was actually, I guess, a revisiting of the first one. So the
Okay.
first one was published by Hodder. I landed a publishing contract with them, world's second biggest publisher. No idea how I got it in terms of, I don't understand what their logic was in giving me the contract. I just signed it, didn't really read it. But the problem with that, Jason, was that the contract I signed was for what's known as a series book rather than a standalone.
Okay.
And in the publishing world, you've got those two types of books, and a series book has to take the tone of voice and the structure and the style of a certain format.
Okay.
And a standalone allows the author to express their own, not necessarily their own opinions, but their own creativity in the way it's produced. So the Startup Coach was the book I wanted to write, but not in the format I wanted to write it, because I realized pretty soon after I actually read through the contract I'd signed, but I had to do a certain word count, certain number of exercises. It actually had to be more like a workbook.
Okay.
And I had to speak as if, I was, yeah, it just weren't my tone of voice. So Bot It was my opportunity to start again, blank canvas. What did I want to achieve from that book and redo it? And what I realized was I wanted a book that would ultimately serve as a guide for my kids on how they could start, run, and grow a business. It was simple as that. I wanted it in a language that an 8-year-old can understand. I wanted it to be a combination of checklists and cheerleading, because I find that business books are either far too fluffy and motivational, but they're like McDonald's. It feels great when you eat it, but pretty soon afterwards, it's not the best. Or they're like checklists of a typical management book full of big words to impress upon you how important the author is,
Mm.
but again, not very fun to read. So I wanted to hit that sweet spot between the two. So plain English, in that sweet spot. And ultimately, I wanted it to be the kind of book. My eldest son, Jordan, was in the academic system. He got persuaded to do A levels against my best wishes. He did A levels at AS level, so halfway through. I think he got 1F. I told him to jump off then, cut his losses now. He carried on. I think he ended up with 2Fs. He did okay. But then, believe it or not, his mother, the school, everyone was telling him to go to university.
Okay.
And to me, that's, you have to be honest about where you're going.
Yep.
But I could see that he was hardworking. He's a thoroughly decent guy. He, of course I'd say that he's my son, but I could really see something in him. It just wasn't in academia. And he ended up starting his own business when he left after A levels, because that was pretty much the only option open to him. And I wanted the book to help facilitate that kind of thing. So that was where the book came from. And yeah, it's done okay. I finished the manuscript on the 24th of February, 2020. Now you can
Okay.
imagine,
Yep.
knowing what we know now, that was probably the worst time to finish a book manuscript. I got it back in June, and I was reading through the drafts, and the foreword referred to all of the crazy stuff going on in the world. Okay. It referred to the geopolitical uncertainty between the US and North Korea, and could it be World War III? It referred to the worst weather systems that we've ever seen in the UK, Storm Ciara and Storm Dennis. Do you remember all of this stuff?
No, not really.
And
Nothing existed right before
this
before
is
COVID.
it. This is it. So in the first couple of months of 2020, we thought the world was on its head anyway. And by the way, there was this crazy virus over in China, and who knows what's going to happen with that. But never mind that. Let's talk about the weather. So anyway, tail between my legs, I had to rewrite some good chunks of the book and put some context around it. And it released in October, and yeah, it's been charting in WH ever since.
Congratulations. Yeah. So what's the future for the writing? I know you still do lots of speaking and more corporate events. Another book. Is there a natural lead on from Boss It? Is there a next chapter?
There is, and you're actually going to be the first person to hear publicly about what that next chapter is. The only other person is my wife, who's been bored to tears about me being excited about it. And I have to say now, this is subject to it getting commissioned, it then getting acquired, and all of the normal hurdles that you have to go through in the publishing process. It's also subject to me not changing my mind, but I am partway through planning. One of the things that I learned while writing Boss It was that the lessons that could be applied to a new business can be applied to an existing business. I talk about the dream planning review process. I talk about the pillars of scaling and so on. All of that stuff, it's not just for startups. It was actually for all kinds of businesses. And I realized that when I was doing my review of the drafts for coronavirus and adapted some of the content to businesses that would actually need to hit reset. The restaurant who's not had any customers in for a few months, how do they hit reset and get going again? But also, the content was not so much about business, but it was more about mindset. It was about taking control of your time, your income, your life. It was about taking control of the decisions and proactively driving your business. And a lot of the stuff that makes up a good business actually makes up good performance personally as well. You
Absolutely.
can, things like the goal setting, things like the management and measuring, things like the way that you need to approach things, all of that stuff actually could apply equally, for example, to weight loss as it could to business. It could apply equally to running a marathon. It could apply equally to learning a new foreign language. So what I want to do is, my personal ambition is to expand out the Bossip principles and take what I've developed, but bring it into the personal performance world. Not so much just around athletic, but actually around mindset, around making sure that you've got a balanced life, around making sure that your definition of success is ticked not just on the career front, not just on the financial front, but on relationships, on spirituality, on mental well-being, all of that stuff, and make it trying to help that move towards the holistic view of life and how it should be.
Yeah, I mean that's a big tick for me. That's definitely why we started Human 24, our new brand. I mean, we're really early in the days of certainly of the nutritional products, but we started with a community base. We started with this podcast and content, and our community is exactly that. It's past the, there's a productivity movement out there which is brilliant, and it's growing, and it's self-improvement, but it's not all forward. There's got to be balance. Now, balance is challenging because a lot of people criticize people's balance, and and your own balance and your own approach is no one else's business, right? Because when you're 21, 22, you can work yourself into the ground, and that's it. That's the time of the age you should do that, because you're testing your boundaries. You're seeing how hard you can work. You're seeing what's possible. As you get a bit older, and family comes in, and you start to think about other things. There's this whole holistic view of performance that we talk about at Human 24, and it's how you get a great start to the morning, how you stay focused with clarity, and then how you continue that in the afternoon without getting muddled brain and brain fog with loads of food. And
this is so important. And I think there's a negative narrative. I mean, you've said it's positive around productivity. I would want to call out the negativity of what I call the hustle culture.
Yeah, that is. Yeah,
5
totally
a.m.
agree.
starts, the perceived need that people have. And I've seen it in my son. But he's watched Gary Vaynerchuk, and he's all motivating. Yeah, I can do this, and I'm going to be having my goals up on my wall. And it's great that he's seeing that there's a different way of life to staying in bed all day and claiming on the dole. That's great. That's really admirable.
Completely
However,
agree.
it's potentially unhealthy as well if it's taken to the extreme. And one of the greatest things over the last, I'd say it's about the last 2 or 3 years, is that blokes have been happier to talk about their mental health and mental well-being.
Yeah.
And I've really noticed it. It's not just a narrative that we're putting out there. I've really noticed people are, in conversations I have with mates, they are actually opening up about challenges. And I guess the tipping point for me was I popped down to see my old man in March, and he's a typical bloke from the kind of upbringing I had. A bit of bravado and manual work. Always worked in a factory. Family business was making safes and locksmithing. So there was a certain air of arrogance that always went around him on well-being and I'm tough enough. And he told me that he's been feeling anxious. And for my dad to say that was just the I guess the tipping point of me realizing, you know what, this isn't just people saying, oh, isn't it great that blokes are talking about it? Blokes are talking about it. So it's great that we've got that, but I think there's still a bit of a stigma towards the reception of some of this stuff. And what I mean is, you go in WH Smith, and I don't want to insult WH Smiths because they're really kind enough to stock my book and put it really prominently. But you go in there, and all of these books that could genuinely be helpful tend to be aimed at a female audience. They tend to have pink covers, and they tend to be very fluffy. And I think to myself, would a bloke feel brave enough to read that on the tube? Because I wouldn't. And I know that's my weakness, not the book's weakness. But I still wouldn't. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily connect with me or
Yeah.
give off the image I want to give. And I think it's great what Tyson Fury had done, putting his face to a book where he's been quite vulnerable. And I would like to, I'd like to do whatever bit I can do to help that, because we've all got mental health. We all sometimes feel out of control. We all sometimes feel anxious and so on. And the challenge with these things is often it just needs one person's message that you connect with, and that person's the one that makes the difference to you. They could be saying exactly the same thing as someone else, but if you've got that rapport with them and you feel like you trust them, you'll take their message rather than someone else. It could be delivery, it could be whatever it is that works. And I would like to take what I've learned through writing Boss It and apply those principles into the wider world.
Do you think there's a danger where we can focus? This might sound a daft question given all you said. We can focus too much on mental. I don't want to call it frailty, Carl, but do you think there's a tipping point? I think there's a certain balance where people need to be accountable. They need to be responsible for their own life, and sometimes is there a balance between those with a bit of a nihilistic viewpoint and a looking elsewhere for accountability?
Yes. Yeah.
A little bit too much. And is that a tipping point we're in danger of going over with the good focus upon mental health?
Quite possibly. Now, I'm not qualified to talk about mental health or psychology, or indeed physical health. And yeah, that's one of the conflicts I've got in my own mind. Speaking very openly and honestly about this, about writing the book, is who am I to say this stuff? It's based on my experience, and what I'm seeing is not necessarily backed up by science, and that's a concern of mine. But my view is, when it comes to physical health, and I think there's a lot of synergy between physical health and mental health, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. It's always gone hand in hand with me. Always.
This is it. And when you look at physical health, if you were to constantly say to yourself, I've got a bad back, I've got a bad back, I've got a bad back, oh, my back's really sore. Whether it is or not, it's going to be sore. You're going to talk yourself into having a sore back because you'll be looking for the problems in your back. It was much the same that I had some digestive issues, and I'd never got to the core of what it was. But I'd convinced myself that I was gluten intolerant and I'm probably going to be celiac and so on. And you know what? In that process of convincing myself, I was looking for tenuous links between being in the same room as a slice of bread and having a dodgy belly.
Yeah.
And I reinforced my own beliefs.
Yeah.
And the challenge I guess you've got is likewise with mental fitness. If you obsess over it, and in particular, if you obsess over it negatively and look for the challenges, you'll find the challenges. One of the things in life that I found, whether it's wealth, whether it's in business, whatever it is you find what you go out looking for. If you're buying a new car, let's say, I don't know, you've always driven Ford and you're buying a Vauxhall. You go out, I can guarantee you that you'll start seeing Vauxhalls. And there's a name for it, reticular something. I can't remember, but there's a name for it. And likewise, Jason, have you ever ridden a motorbike?
Never. No.
Okay, if you ride a motorbike,
far too cowardly.
Well, I actually came off a bike, and it was one of my personal challenges to get back on it. I got back on it, and I scared the living daylights out of myself. But I did it. I got my license. But if you go on a motorbike, the bike goes where you're looking. So if you're looking at the trees, rather than the way the road is curving, you will head straight into the trees. Target fixation. It's guaranteed. You simply won't be able to physically steer the bike while looking over there. It just wouldn't happen. And the same happens in life. What we're looking for, we find, and if we're constantly trying to find improvements, trying to chip away, and we obsess over it, that's to the detriment of something else.
Yeah, I do think there's a, I do wonder, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but is there a Pandora's box of if we opened it a little bit too wide, and and now are we not going to be able to get back to that, that kind of time where you did you understood the difference between a bad day and an imbalance, mental, a real mental health problem, because I think there's a lot of people have a lot of bad days.
Yes.
And
yes.
most people's bad days are light gray or dark gray. And I think it's your responsible to get out of those bad days, your responsibility. But at the same time, there are a lot of people that can't. And I kind of fear that muddying of the water. So the people who do need help don't get it, and the people who don't really need help and should be helping themselves
100%, because one of the challenges that we've got, and this has been going on for 10 years plus, the teleplan culture of, you go into a doctor's and it's the easiest thing for them to prescribe. Put you on 10-20 milligrams of teleplan and hope for the best. It's quite telling, but I'm actually quite happy and open to say I was on teleplan about 8 years ago for about 6 months. No, probably longer than 8 years ago. It was during my divorce, so probably 9-10 years ago. I was on it for about 6 months to balance everything out and get me out of the shock of that. It's quite telling, but I'm happy to say that now. But even 5 years ago, I'd have been embarrassed to say that for whatever reason.
Which is a good thing, right? Which is a really good thing.
That's a really good thing. It's good that we can say it. It's good that we can lead by example. However, there's the dangerous side effect, as you say, but we're always trying to find a fix, and we're always trying to blame something outside of our control, but actually something that's in our control. Day to day, we make hundreds, if not thousands, of micro decisions. And the reality is that those decisions are in our control. Yep. So this morning, I have the decision whether to turn up on this podcast. I have the decision whether to get out of bed. I have the decision whether to have coffee or whether to knock back a bottle of whiskey. Not that I drink whiskey. All of these decisions were going through my head by about 2 minutes past 7 in the morning.
Yep.
But I guess my concern, which is aligned to yours, is that sometimes people don't want to take responsibility for those decisions, in particular when those decisions are more tricky and they're involving career, relationships, finances, and facing up to some of the stuff that we need to face up to as humans, and prefer to blame something else for not taking control.
Yeah, it's a challenging one. Carl, to finish with, just a couple of outside business questions, I guess. Tell me about, family life. I know you've got quite a few children, and about your own personal performance wellness, what your routine is, and then finally, tattoos and trainers.
Excellent. So, family life, yes. So I've got the most amazing wife, Sarah, and I have no idea how she puts up with me, but she truly is my better half. She frees me up to do the stuff that I do, and actually takes on what I would say is more than can be expected of any partner in a relationship. And you'll understand a bit more in a moment. Jordan's my eldest son, he's 22. Lauren is 14. Daisy, or she prefers to be known as Dee, is my stepdaughter, who's 13. Charlie is 12. And then my youngest son, Junior, is non-verbal autistic.
Yeah, I can remember you telling me that when we spoke last.
That's it. So he's got a very high level of need, and Sarah has amazingly devoted her life to him. She's given up work, full-time carer, and potentially full-time homeschooler, depending on how all of that stuff pans out. So that's family. In terms of wellness and peak performance, I'm a big believer logically, and I've got to say logically because I don't buy into this emotionally myself. logically of the wheel of life and the need to keep everything balanced. However, when it comes to physical performance, when it comes to training, when it comes to diet, God, I'm up and down like everyone else. I'm sure there's people listening who can resonate with that. One day it will be protein shakes, chicken and broccoli, get down the gym. Next day, and unfortunately, there's been far too many of them during lockdown, Belgian buns and McDonald's. So,
do you find a difference in terms of clarity and wellness when your eating habits and your training habits are good, and as opposed to
massively,
it makes a huge difference. I mean, it is life. That is a key to life.
This is it. I'm a strong believer that it is the key to life. I have certain things that I do religiously, in terms of vitamins, in terms of the amount of water I drink. I find that's vital.
Water's key.
I try to limit my alcohol because my body doesn't react too well to alcohol. Beer in particular, I can drink half a pint of beer and go up 3 jean sizes. I don't know why it does it to me. Okay. In terms of training though, and you probably see I carry a hell of a lot of extra weight. I just enjoy lifting heavy stuff. That's what I enjoy. And my thinking is that some activity is better than focusing on the treadmill, which I absolutely hate, and would never turn up and do. So that's I guess my approach there. And then we were going to talk about trainers and
tattoos.
So for tattoos, I've finally, I think, come to terms with my tattoos. And
okay.
Why I've gone down this path. I mean, my very first one was actually a tattoo here when I was 16, which has since been covered up. And I've been getting tattoos forever and a day since. So I dread to think how many I've got. But I've got an irrational fear of needles. And I know it is irrational. And I've come to terms, but actually the thing that I don't like about needles is being out of control. Okay. Because generally you're in an environment where you're being given an injection or a blood test, and you're out of control of when it goes in, etc., etc. And tattoos have been, I guess, my way of controlling that process and sticking two fingers up to my fear. Okay. But yeah, I'm incredibly scared. You can imagine I've had my first COVID jab. It was far more traumatic than it ever should have been. I know I've had extra invoices sent from the anaesthetist when I've been in for an operation because of the amount of people needed to hold me down. It's not nice. I won't go into it in detail, but yeah, it's for me. It's taking control. And trainers, lockdown got me. Lockdown's got me, and I bought a few pairs.
How many pairs do you own, Carl?
Wow. So I've got a soft spot, in particular for Jordans and Nike Air Maxes. Okay. And I think it comes down to, I guess, my upbringing and not having Nikes. It's as simple as that.
Strange, and
I now want to be able to go into my trainer room. Yes, I have a trainer room.
Fantastic.
And feel like I'm going into a shop and picking out the pair that I want.
Go on then. How many pairs? Or have you lost count?
I'm going to guess around 100, 150.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big room.
With 2 feet.
Yeah. Great. Listen, Carl, really appreciate your time. Appreciate you chatting, candidly. I hope the book continues to do really well. I'll continue to follow you on, on a variety of social media platforms. Really like the stuff you put out, and it's been great to catch up.
Jason, been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.